Hey everybody, Justin here. It's an early morning, early Monday morning when I'm recording this. It's about quarter to 8, and I've got a ton of other kind of recording things that I'm going to be doing during the day. Not YouTube related, but some other projects that I'm going to be getting to. But I was inspired to do this video from one of my good friends who's also a YouTuber. His name is Jack Fossett, and I will be putting a link to his YouTube channel in the video description. So if you're into guitars and guitar playing, I highly recommend his channel. He does very, very good reviews, really top-notch stuff, very entertaining to watch. He's a great guitar player. He's also got some original music up there as well that I've had the pleasure of being able to play on with him. I'm also in his band. Just an absolute great guy. I love Jack so much. So if you're into guitars and into guitar playing, I definitely recommend his channel. But he released a couple of videos on the top 10 worst gear he's played, whether it be, low budget, medium budget, high budget. Top 10 worst gear he's ever played. And then he did another one of his top 10 favorite budget friendly things that he's played. And budget friendly can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But in the grand scheme of things, what he means by that is things that would be on the affordable side compared to, their target, audience or whatever. I'll just say it like that. So this video, I was inspired to do this one, and I'll do one next week as well related to this. But I've played a lot of keyboards over probably the last, I'm going to just say 20 years, 23 years since being out of high school. I've played some amazing instruments, but I've also played some not so amazing instruments. And I want to preface this by saying I don't mean any disrespect to anybody that might own any of these things on this list. This is just my own personal experience and my own opinion on playing these particular instruments. I'm just typing something out here in my notes here because I had another thing go into my honorable mentions that I'll be referring to. Because if you think about the past 20 plus years of playing, I've played a lot of stuff. I've played a lot of keyboards. I've owned a lot of keyboards. And it was really hard to think back on different periods and different projects I was in and the different setups that I've used and have played, or any situation where I have been either at a jam session playing with people and used what was there versus versus things that I've had to play for backline on occasion. Let me just type one more in here for my honorable mentions. So yeah, whether it's at a jam session and I used what was provided there, or I had to play a gig and had to end up using backline, which partly, and I'll get into some of the stories, partly was my decision, but the other part of it was, oh no, I was invited to play on something, and oh, we have a keyboard for you, so things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rattle off my top 10. I will probably stick in an honorable mention where applicable, where I have some of the same issues with a particular piece. But again, these are my own personal opinions. No, I don't mean any, disrespect to anybody that owns these instruments and that likes them. This is just my own personal experience with these. So, here we go. I'm just going to go from 10 to 1. And some of these might surprise some people. But I'll talk about also why I'm not a fan of these instruments. Number 10, the Behringer DeepMind 12. So this is Behringer's first entry into making synthesizers. It kind of originally would have come across, at first glance as, oh, it's an original creation. It's not. You could have people tell you that it was inspired by, say, the Juno 106. Believe somebody even told me that they actually used some of the chips from the Juno in this synth. I could be very, very wrong on that, so don't quote me on that. So here we have a 4-octave, polysynth. So 12 voices. You have 2 oscillators. You've got not a bad sounding filter. You got a low pass and a high pass filter. You've got 3 different envelopes. So you've got an amp envelope, filter envelope, and a mod envelope. The mod envelope can be used, can be routed pretty much anywhere you want. There's a pretty good mod matrix inside the DeepMind. One of my favorite things about it was the chord memory. So for those that don't know what that is, you can program a chord into chord memory and play it across the entire keyboard, just one key at a time. They also had polychord, where you could assign a different chord to each of the 49 keys on the keyboard, and you could save, banks of them, for different songs maybe, or maybe different different library of chords that you wanted to trigger. I actually used that all the time when I had my DeepMind. It was really, really handy to have, especially where if it's just me playing and I've got a big 8-note chord that I need to play, on the DeepMind, but I've got to have my right hand playing something else. It was really, really handy to have. Some would call it cheating. I would say, no, it's just another tool in the toolbox. But here's my issue with it. The big one is it's a 4-octave keyboard. And for me, on a polysynth, and what I mean by polysynth is unlike a monosynth like the 2600 over my left shoulder, which can only sound one note at a time, or in this case, in the 2600, if you patch it right, you can play duophonic, so 2 notes at a time. A polysynth means you can play multiple notes at a time, so you can play chords, depending on how many voices of polyphony the instrument allows. For instance, the Behringer allows 12 voices of polyphony. Now, the neat thing about the DeepMind 12 is you can stack them in various ways. So you could play it as a monosynth with just one voice, or you could stack the voices in unison, as many as you wanted. So you could do 2 voice, 3 voice, 4 voice, all the way up to 12 voice unison. Or you could even limit the, I don't want to say limit, you could even change up the poly mode. So you could actually stack 2 voices, for a 6 voice, and then you get basically 2 stacked voices, and then you can detune them. So it's almost like kind of having a 4 oscillator synth. But my issue is it's a 4-octave keyboard, and on a polysynth, I have to have at least 5. I need to be able to have the range, and I've often found myself having to jump octaves on the fly when playing the DeepMind. And, when I'm on the upper octave, I wish I had the lower octave, kind of thing. So I really felt like kind of cramped in a way. I could have gotten the desktop, but if I'm playing live, I don't really feel like the desktop version to a MIDI controller when I'm playing live is not really efficient. because then I got to set up another stand for the desktop, and then I got to, deal with MIDI controlling and all that stuff. Yeah, I got to have 5 octaves on a polysynth. And I felt like the key bed, it was okay. It wasn't the worst, synth action I've ever played. More on that later. But it also wasn't the greatest. As far as I'm concerned, the greatest for me would probably be the DX7 or the Motif series from Yamaha. So, number 10 for me is the Behringer DeepMind 12. I'm going to stick an honorable mention in here and say the Odyssey. While the instrument sounds great, it's built like a tank. I'm not a fan of the key bed. There's probably going to be a theme here. And the theme is on key beds. Because I've had carpal tunnel surgery back in 2018. I've mentioned this several times on this channel already. My hands have not been the same since. But the thing with the Odyssey key bed, at least I'm noticing, that the sharp and flat keys, the black keys, are, to my hands, a little bit heavier than the natural keys, the white keys. White keys feel incredibly light, fast, and quick. Maybe a little on the cheap side. But the black keys require a little more effort to play. And on any key bed, and I know there could have been ways that they could have tweaked this, on any key bed, it should be balanced throughout the key bed. The feel should be even between the black keys and the white keys. More on that later. So the Odyssey, just for that reason, gets an honorable mention here. Number 9, the Korg Triton Extreme. Okay, so in 1999, Korg releases the Triton. I want to say that this is kind of in the lineage of the Trinity workstation, released in 95, where you've got kind of the same, almost the same workflow, but the Triton kind of really adds a bunch of things to it. Now, I'll tell you why I picked the Triton Extreme. Number one, I've owned one for about maybe a couple of years. It had a nice key bed. It was actually, believe it or not, a Yamaha, I think one of the variants of the FS key bed that you'd find in the Motif, original Motif, the Motif ES. So this is back when Korg was licensing the key beds from Yamaha before they started making their own with the M3. Had a nice key bed. My thing with the Extreme, if you compare it to, say, the earlier Tritons, there wasn't a lot of expandability. Now, I can kind of see why they did this, because they crammed in nearly everything from their series of expansion boards that they had released for the Triton series, and also the Karma, because in the Karma you could fit 2 of the Triton boards in there, plus the EXB Moss board, which is incredibly expensive even to this day. It's one of those things that has gone up in price over the years. So what Korg have done with the Extreme is they've upped the polyphony from 62 voices to 120 voices. That's totally cool with me. What they did was they've taken a collection of sounds from their expansion library. I want to say there was maybe 9 or 10, maybe more than that, expansion boards. They've taken entire libraries from some. They've compiled what they would call a best of collection from some others, and they threw it all into this workstation. And then what happens? Oh, but you didn't include this sound from such and such an expansion board, and I really wanted that sound, but I have no way to put any more expansion boards into it, other than the EXB Moss board. So they did that. They also added the valve force circuit, which I believe was on the Electribe. Again, don't quote me on that. And it was supposed to kind of warm up the sound and give you an analog kind of feel to it. to my ears, it sounded really like bassy. I didn't get like the mid range that I expected from it, and it could also get very very harsh at the same time. So for me, it that any preset that had that valve force engaged, I shut that off immediately. And recording with it in the studio, the engineer I was working with, and I were both like, it really sounds thin, very very thin in the studio. And these 20 years later, when I've had the karma, I know why. When you go into the master EQ section of any of the programs or the combis on any of the Triton series, 9 times out of 10 you're going to find it's a three band master EQ. The low end is going to be greatly boosted. The high end is going to be boosted. The mids are going to be cut. I'm not a fan of that. You have to have mid range. You've got to have some mid range because there's a lot of stuff in there that when you cut it out, you're missing a lot of the sound. You're missing presence in the sound. So now, anytime I use the Karma or anytime I use the Triton software, um, I take a minute to check that master EQ and I reverse everything. I'll cut the lows, I'll cut the highs a little bit, and then I'll boost the mids up to again try to get some fullness in the sound. The other thing I didn't like about it was there were some aspects of the build quality, and it's the same thing with the Karma. If you get the 61 or the 76 key Triton Extreme, and I think it's true with the other Tritons, the end caps are hollowed out on the inside. And if you've gigged out with a Triton as much as I have, those end caps are going to start to crack and potentially break off. Matter of fact, if I were to go see my Triton Extreme now, and I know exactly where it is, I know who has it too. I'm very, dear, dear friends with him. One of the end caps is completely missing. So for the build quality in that aspect and the lack of expansion, the Triton Extreme is number 9 for me. Number 8, the Kurzweil MIDI board. Okay, here we have an 88 key master keyboard with poly aftertouch and a gorgeous action. The thing is, it weighed about 85 pounds. So for gigging, and this is when I was kind of dabbling in using software as well as controlling the Triton from a weighted keyboard. And that might be, and I've explained kind of how to do that with the montage M8X video, one of the videos that I did, and as well as the CK88, where if you've got a multi-timbral instrument, you can control one of those timbres or one of those channels from an external keyboard. I could do that with the MX61, and maybe I might do that in a video. But I used to do that with the Triton in combi mode, where I would put something like put a piano sound on any of the combi presets that I would use. I would put a piano sound on, say, channel 9. I would set the MIDI board to transmit on MIDI channel 9. Okay, my piano's going to live there on the MIDI board, and then I can play another sound on the Triton. Here's the thing with the MIDI board. I forget which version I had. There were 3 versions. I might have had the 3rd one. But anytime I played relatively hard on it or relatively fast on it, it would completely freeze up. It would lock up and I'd have to shut it down in the middle of a gig, and I couldn't tell you how many gigs I've done this with, and then start it back up. And I've had instances where I was roped into, and I'm not happy that I had to do this, having to provide my rig as a backline. I hated that. Like, this is my setup. I have presets. I have everything ready to go for my needs. Why am I allowing somebody else to play this stuff? And I gotta set up a piano over here and an organ over here, and I'm told this like maybe the day before the show. So luckily, and I'm very blessed and grateful that I never have to do that again. Um, and I had somebody else playing the MIDI board, controlling the Triton, and it kept freezing up on them. And that was the last thing that I ever wanted. And I didn't want to change anything about the rig. The rig was set up as it was, so I'm not changing anything because I want to just be able to walk up to it when, it's time for our band to go on and play. Um, so yeah, so for that reason, the keyboard would freeze up quite a bit when I did anything hard or when I did anything fast on it. For that reason, MIDI board gets number 8. Um, I'll throw in an honorable mention in here. I had a General Music Pro 1 digital piano for a little while. That used to do the same thing with me. Um, I was using it at church for a while in 2013, 2014, and I finally had to let it go. It felt okay. You know, as far as the action went, it sounded really good. I liked the piano sounds, but it kept freezing up on me, and I don't know why. So yeah, the General Music Pro 1 gets an honorable mention here. Number 7, the Casio Privia PXS3000. So this is an interesting story. I have not owned this piano. I will never own a Casio. I'm sorry. For those that like Casio, um, I don't mean any disrespect to you, but this is just my experience. Um, I played one at Guitar Center, and I've watched some reviews on it, especially as far as the action goes. Um, and I saw this review on it and on the action and the comment that they made on it, and I think I was in there for something else. I was at a Guitar Center in Portsmouth for something else, and they had a PXS 3000. I'm like, I wonder if they're right. And sure enough, they were. The black keys were significantly lighter feeling than the white keys. And for me, when I'm playing piano, I can't have that at all. I have to have the action completely balanced and uniform across the entire keyboard, whether it be a graded action or a balanced action. It's got to be uniform across the keyboard for me. I understand that there are sacrifices that need to be made, but to be honest with you, for me, the action and the playability is more important than the form factor. Sorry, Casio. Um, and I also saw that Casio on a live stream had commented on this guy's review. Um, and in the review, this guy who's a master piano player, um, classical chop, way more classical chops than I would ever have. Um, take some piano weights, some weights to measure, the action on on a piano, on an actual acoustic grand piano, and he used them on the Casio. Now, you would think that if you're going to try to replicate the action of an acoustic piano, that this is important. Um, Casio completely dismissed this, by the way, in their kind of comeback, as I'll call it, um, where the guy basically took a piano a key weight, put it on the white key, and then put the same thing on the black key. You could tell by looking at this measurement, the black keys were significantly lighter. And again, you can't have that. When you play, let's say I play a C minor chord. What's the middle note in a C minor chord? An E flat. You're going to hear the E flat probably about a few milliseconds before you hear the C and the G. And if you want to hit every note at the same time, that's not going to fly. So for those reasons, the PXS 3000 has made this countdown, and I will not touch anything from Casio again. Honestly, I haven't liked anything from them since the CZ1. Um, I mean, I'm sure they've made other, kind of interesting stuff like the FZ1 sampler, things like that. But yeah, other than maybe those two things, if I ever find them in the wild, I have no use for Casio. I had a CZ101, but I always MIDI controlled it because I wasn't a fan of the keys. playing it from MIDI keys. I sound like a hypocrite when I say that because I've got a PSS 270 up there, but I'm not playing it professionally. Like, I'm not gigging out with that. That's just to have fun around, have fun in the studio with. But anyway, um, so all right, number 6. We're gonna go back to build quality and keybed for this one. The Yamaha MODX7. Now, feature-wise, great instrument. Feature-wise, you basically have the montage engine, the original montage engine, with a couple of tweaks in a more affordable package. But what did Yamaha do to get the cost down? Well, a couple of the big things were they stripped down the control surface quite a bit, down to 4 sliders and 4 knobs. They also cut down the amount of parts you can have for the sound to include seamless sound switching, where you can change from one sound to the other and not have anything cut out. They went from 8 parts down to 4. In the MODX Plus, they've ramped that up back to 8. So the MODX Plus is the one to get if you were going to get. Now, if you were going to get a MODX Plus, I recommend the MODX 8 Plus. Stay away from the 7, stay away from the 6. And I will tell you why. The build quality is horrible. Really, really light, cheap plastic. I've actually had to replace some parts on my MODX7 before I sold it. I had to replace the volume control board. I've had to replace the super knob cap. I've had to replace... I would have had to replace one of the side panels, actually both side panels, because a couple of the corners had started chipping away and started cracking. And yeah, no. And I have to say that the MODX 6 and 7 have probably the worst synth-weighted or semi-weighted action I've ever played in a keyboard. If not the worst, maybe the second worst. I'll probably say second or third because I got a couple others in this list that are going to get probably top priority for that. Yeah, so it was a horrible action. It would have been nice to have had aftertouch on it, but it lasted me probably. I think I've had it for 3 years, 4 years before I finally sold it and got the Yamaha CK88. But yeah, so for that reason, the build quality and the atrocious keybed, the Yamaha MODX, is at number 6. Number 5, the Arturia KeyLab 88. The original 49 and 61 had their own problems with the keybed. The Mark II 61, I had it. Don't have it anymore. I sold it. I just wasn't using it enough because I moved on to using, like, say, the Hydrasynth Deluxe as my main studio controller. So the build quality of the Mark II 61 was actually very, very nice. But I'm not talking about the 61 here. I'm talking about the 88, the Mark I and the Mark II. Again, remember when I said there was a theme here? Horrible keybed. I personally stay away from anything with a weighted Fatar keybed. Don't like them. The number one reason I don't like them is they feel awkward for me. And it has to do not only with the weight, but the way the key bottoms out against the bottom of the keybed. On most, if not every Fatar action that I've ever played, the key has a bit of a bounce at the bottom. And I like my hammer action or weighted keybed, whatever you want to call it, I like it nice and solid. As soon as I hit the bottom of the keystroke, or when I play a chord or when I play anything, I don't want to have any bounce in there at all. It's got to feel nice and solid. So for that reason, and also the reason that I never really used the drum pads. I know a lot of people find them extremely useful. I've never programmed drums with the pads. I've tried a couple times, couldn't do it. I've always used a keyboard to do that. Um, I have for the last like 20 years. Um, and also the layout. It would have been nice to have had, especially on the Mark II, it would have been nice to have all of the controls, like your control surface, your faders, your buttons, your sliders, on the left side, so that you can play with your right hand and change stuff with the left hand. Because otherwise, you're playing and you're having to cross over to reach something over on the other side. Um, so for those couple of reasons, mainly the horrible weighted action, um, the KeyLab 88 is number five. Number four, the Roland Jupiter 50. So the Roland Jupiter 50 was a cut down version of the Jupiter 80. I'll tell you my problem with this one. Um, my problem was the interface and the way that the sounds were organized. Um, you basically had scenes, and it's kind of what you have in the montage right now, with performances, and it's also what you have in the current lineup of Roland instruments, like the Phantom series and the new V Stage series. Everything is set up in scenes. But um, as far as the Jupiter 50 goes, I was invited to play. I was invited to a couple of jam sessions, and over at a couple of friends' houses. They had at the time a Roland Juno stage on the bottom, which honestly I was okay with that interface. I could get to whatever sounds I needed to get to. I could quickly set up favorites after deciphering the hieroglyphs that is the Roland owner's manual for it. But the Jupiter 50 was painful to get any sounds set up on it. It was painful to get lead sounds. It was painful to get, pads or whatever else I wanted. Because the lead sounds are over in this section, or, oh, my organ sounds are over in this section, or, my synths are over here in this section, in like the lower section, or whatever it is, however it's set up. Um, I did not get along with that instrument very well. And when you've got a cryptic owner's manual with a cryptic interface, doesn't work at all for me. Um, so for that reason, basically the instrument was unplayable for me. Um, I did not have a fun time with that. So for that reason, the Roland Jupiter 50 hits number four. Number three, this one, along with its honorable mention, might be a bit controversial. But for those that know me, will know why I hate this brand and why I have no use for them. I will just preface this that yes, I am on a budget. Um, I only have so much to, I'm on a fixed income, and anything that I make making music has to go back into, music equipment. Um, but I digress. Number three, the Nord piano. And this goes with all of them. Even the Nord Grand, because I couldn't, the way it was set up at the store that I was at to try it out, it was set up in a way where it would not have felt like the piano. It would not have felt like the piano was supposed to feel. But the Nord piano, once again, we have a Fatar key bed. That's already a no-go for me because I don't like the way it feels. Number two, the price tag. I can't see spending $3,000 on a keyboard that does only one or two things. This goes with the Electro series. This goes with the Stage series. The Stage series is right around 5 to 6 grand. I don't see it at all. Um, I don't see the appeal. I don't understand what is so special about them, because I can do the same stuff on a montage or even on the CK88, or even the Yamaha YC series, or the CP series. I can do all the same stuff that Nord does, to an extent. Even on the MODX8, if I had a MODX8, there are some things that I can do on that a Nord can do. Mainly importing samples, and actually importing samples easier, because you got to go through a piece of software with Nord before you even get to the keyboard. With the Yamaha stuff, all I have to do is put my samples in WAV format on a flash drive, stick them into the back of the keyboard, in this case the Montage M or the MODX, and even the original Montage. And they're right there on the flash drive, and I can put them anywhere I want. But I digress. I've had to play a Nord Stage 2 a couple of times as backline at a couple of Soulfest music festivals here. Once it was on my own decision because I forgot they had a Nord, and I was doing a set on one of the side stages, and we had another set immediately right after that on the main stage. So I wouldn't have known how much time. I didn't know how much time we would have had to pack up my MODX, haul it all the way up to the main stage, and get it set up and get it sound checked. So I asked the crew, well, can you have your backline keyboard set up there just in case I don't have time? And I didn't have time. We basically were off one stage right onto the other. The way this instrument was set up, it was set up with a piano, with a pad. I needed to get a Rhodes sound. That was near impossible. It took me probably a minute and a half to figure out how to shut the pad sound off. The interface was just unintuitive at all. Too cluttered. I know Nord want to have, like, a simple interface, kind of one knob per function. Here's where everything's laid out. It was a total mess. And if I'm on a time crunch to get my sound dialed in, it probably would have been better for me to just use my MODX, because then I've got everything where I want it and I know where everything is. But that's where my issues just began. The interface. I find it really hard to read, especially somebody with 20/70 vision. 20/50, 20/40 if I'm lucky with these glasses. um, I had a hard time with that interface. And I don't know why it's taken Nord this long to put actual drawbar faders on their, organs, whether it be the Electro, the Stage, or even the organ series. I played an Electro 3, I've played an Electro 2, I've played a couple of other ones. I've never liked the buttons. I found them just. I struggled to get the drawbar settings that I really liked, that I knew. Um, More so than I would when using actual faders. And I'll tell you why, because I've had experience in playing a Hammond organ at my previous church. My previous church I attended from 2002 up to 2011. They had a Hammond. They had a D152, um, which had drawbars. So I had experience with drawbars. I had no experience with working these buttons. And I don't know why it took them this long to finally put sliders, in their organ section. So again, another interface issue. Let's talk about the sound. I'm not a fan of the piano sounds, and I had to play a Nord Piano 5 at a revival meeting in Boston a couple years ago, and I had all the time in the world to get the piano sound dialed in, and no matter what was installed on that piano, um, I couldn't do it. I like my piano a certain way. I felt like there was no life in the instrument at all. I felt like it was missing something. It was missing something compared to, say, the CFX Grand in either the Montage or the CK88. And when I took the gig, I should have asked them, what would it cost to just rent a CK88? And they were like, no, we don't want to swap anything out. We'd rather just have you play this. And I was like, well, honestly, it was a quick little bit of pay for me. So, and I already committed to it, and I needed to be the bigger guy and just be professional about it. Um, the only other thing I could do was bring a pad in and out of this thing, and not a particularly good one. But again, I felt like every piano that I've ever heard in the Nord library had very little low end, very little sparkle on the top end, and a lot of mid range. Oh, but why don't you just EQ it? I don't EQ. I don't like EQing live. Um, I really don't, because it's not going to fix the problem. The problem is in the samples themselves. If you can get a good sample without having to touch an EQ, and it's my principle in recording in general. If I can get the best sound that I can out of a microphone before I even touch an EQ, then I know I'm starting off on the right path. And then you can go, all right, now we just got to get this piano to sit in the mix. That's where I'll touch an EQ. That's where I'll say, okay, maybe the low end needs to come up like a dB and a half. But, I digress. Um, so Nord Piano 5, number 3. And the Nord Stage as an honorable mention. I'll tell you a couple other things. The Nord Stage, when you do a split on the keyboard, it'll only allow you to split between a B and a C or an E and an F, nowhere in between. What if I want the A to be the bottom of my split point? No, not going to happen, as far as I know. Maybe they've improved it. Maybe they haven't. So that's a deal breaker. And I think I did mention the Fatar key beds. Yeah, they're horrible. But let's talk about the Nord Grand, which has a Kawai key bed. I couldn't evaluate it because it was at a Guitar Center. They had it on the wall, and they had it at an angle. I've said this several times in previous videos. If you are going to display a weighted key bed in a music store, it must lay flat. Do not put it at an angle on your slat wall. Make sure it is laying flat, because most of these actions have mechanical parts in them that are not going to respond the way that they would if the instrument was set flat, the way it's probably normally going to be set up. I had this experiment with the CK88. I tried one at a Guitar Center in Boston. It was at an angle. The action felt really light compared to, say, the MX88 that was sitting right below it. The action felt heavier. Here's the thing. They were using the same key bed. They were using the GHS action. My CK88 feels a little bit heavier than the one that I tried at Guitar Center. Why? Because the one at Guitar Center was at an angle. I don't know how many times I need to say this. If you are selling weighted key beds, or weighted digital pianos or whatever, please place them flat on a stand. All right, so Nord Piano 5, number 3. Number 2. Number 3, do I have? Yeah, I did the Nord Stage. I know I'm going off on a rant. Number 2, the M Audio Axiom series. So here we have MIDI controllers. Semi-weighted key action. Semi-weighted key action was rather unplayable for me. I found it very difficult getting an even velocity response out of, say, a piano sound. And this is back when I was, say, using Reason, and I was also using a couple other things. But the first one that I had was an Axiom 49, and one day it just froze on me. Completely froze. Wouldn't even power up. I'd get the blue screen of death on it. And no way to flash the firmware, no way to do anything on it. Not only that, it was a rather cheap controller. Cheaply built, but premium priced. The second generation Axiom, I felt the key bed a little worse, but here's where M Audio made the mistake. Data entry. The original Axiom had a 10 key keypad on it. Brilliant. Um, they also had a couple of other things that I'm going to talk about. The Axiom second generation got rid of the keypad and put the 10 key keypad on the keyboard itself, on the keys. If there's one thing that I cannot stand in any MIDI controller, it is having to do any kind of data entry from the keyboard itself. I want to be able to change stuff while playing. Especially if I'm changing MIDI channels. I don't want to use the keybed to have to perform any data entry at all. And that leads to my honorable mention, which is the M-Audio KeyStation series. And this will also qualify for the Alesis Q series, which is basically a rebadged M-Audio KeyStation. All right. If I said the action in the Axiom was pretty horrid, the KeyStation is way worse. Again, very limited velocity response. I had absolutely no control over it. It was very uneven. But again, all of your data entry was done from the keyboard. And when I got my first KeyStation 88 back in like 2007, how do you know where everything is? You don't. I had to take a big piece of masking tape, take the owner's manual, and label what each function was on each of the keys. So, for that reason, and this goes into the category of the user interface, for that reason, as well as the horrible action and the horrible build quality, the M-Audio Axiom series, as well as the KeyStation, number 2. Number 1 is not going to be any surprise if you've seen my last review video that I did on this instrument before I sent it back. Number 1 for me, the Roland RD-88 and the EX. Now, the EX is basically an RD-88 with an added acoustic piano, nothing more. And, you can unlock the RD-88 EX acoustic piano for $199 if you already have an RD-88. But the RD-88 EX costs less. I don't know. I don't know what Roland was thinking with that one. And it's the same thing with the RD-2000. Remember the theme here? Remember my review. I couldn't play this piano for more than maybe 5 minutes without my wrists hurting. And remember, I had carpal tunnel surgery back in 2018 on my left hand. My hand has not been the same since. So, after 2 minutes of playing this piano, and the way that this piano sounded, it sounded horrid to my ears. There was a couple of notes that sounded way, way out of tune up in the upper register. There was some really bad frequencies up in, like, say, the 2K to 4K range on most of these pianos, where I couldn't play this thing at all. It was horrible. So I will just leave it there. If you want more information, watch my my thoughts on the RD-88EX. But it has a PHA-4 action, horrible action in my hands. Even the GHS is far better than that. And the GHS action in the Yamahas is not their best action. That goes to the GEX action in the Montage M. All right. So watch the video and you'll find out why that's my number 1. Again, I said this at the beginning of the video, no disrespect to anybody that owns any of these instruments and that likes them and that is getting any use out of these. These are just my personal experiences and my personal opinions. All right, I'll rattle off a couple honorable mentions that I haven't rattled off yet. And some of these are in some weird categories. I'll rattle off the Roland JV80. It sounded great. And it had a nice keybed, except for one thing with the keybed, and it was very common in a lot of Roland instruments around this time. Red glue. All you need to do is Google Roland red glue, and you'll understand why. So that's one of them. I mentioned the Behringer Odyssey. I mentioned the Nord Stage. I'll throw the Krumar 7 out. Um, Now, the Krumar 7 is a physically modeled stage piano. It's more designed as a physically modeled Fender Rhodes. Um, Now, while it sounds great, the Rhodes pianos sound fantastic in this instrument. The weaknesses are in the key bed because it's a guitar key bed and it has that awful bounce at the bottom, as well as the physically modeled piano. That's not where its strength is. So I play in a band with Jack, like I said, and we rehearse on Thursday nights at our bass player's house. And the bass player's got a keyboard rig there. Nice keyboard rig. The Krumar 7 with a Hammond XK1C organ, and then the Mematron, which is a beautiful instrument. I really want to see if I can do a review on that at some point. If he'll ever let me, if he'll ever let me take it home and do a review on it, that would be awesome. But I wind up bringing my CK88 to that, where I can have a proper piano. I just can't get along with the acoustic piano that's in the Krumar 7 at all. Now, you can, through the Krumar 7's built-in Wi-Fi and an iPad app. Um, Actually, I don't think it's an app. I think it's a browser app where if you open up Safari or Chrome or whatever, you put in the IP address for the Krumar, you can go ahead and that's where you can make your adjustments on your sounds. So a little interesting, and I get it. I get they wanted to kind of keep the interface simple. The other thing I'm not a fan of with the 7 is the master volume setting is saved with every preset. So let's say if you've got presets where the master volume is maxed out versus presets where you have the master volume like down a little bit, you're going to run into some problems. So in my personal opinion, the master volume should be completely separate from any of the presets in the Krumar 7. So that gets an honorable mention. Here's a weird one. The Yamaha DJX2. So I remember playing a DJX1 and I was still in high school. I liked the DJX1 because that had, the keys were velocity sensitive. It had some good sounds in it. It did what it needed to do. It was like kind of a groove box in a keyboard, but you could play it like a keyboard. Um, so when the 2 came out, I had an opportunity to get one, and oof, oh, talk about a downgrade from the original. When you've got one model and you improve on it with, like, say, the sequel, like, say, I'll use this as an example: the Mark One DX7, which I have back here, versus the Mark Two DX7. There were some really nice improvements with the Mark II over the Mark One, but the DJX2 versus the DJX1. DJX2 had little to no MIDI implementation at all. You couldn't use it as a MIDI controller. You couldn't control it with MIDI, or you couldn't basically control it from an external keyboard. Um, it had 2 modes. It had DJ mode where you had all your Groovebox, you know, functions and things, and then it had the keyboard mode. Keyboard mode was non-velocity sensitive. They lost the pitch wheel from the original DJX. All you had was a ribbon controller, and it wasn't that great. The effects section, it was a toggle on and off. It was a momentary toggle switch. There was no way to permanently add any effects at all. So, yeah, that one gets an honorable mention. And I think that's it. I think I've mentioned everything else. But, so, once again, I mean, I might be saying this too much, but I don't mean any disrespect to anybody that has or uses any of these instruments on a regular basis and that gets enjoyment out of them. This is just my own personal experience, and apparently negativity gets, a lot of attention on YouTube, but I will balance it by saying that um, next week I will upload my top 10 favorite keyboard instruments I've ever played. So I'm going to go ahead and call that a video for now. So that's going to do it for today. If you like any of the content here, be sure to like my videos, subscribe to my channel, click the notification icon. You'll get notified every time I release a video or anytime I go live. I don't have any regular set schedule to upload or or do a live stream because I am so busy. If you like my music, please go over to my Bandcamp page and listen to some stuff. And if you like what you hear, go ahead and purchase my stuff. It does help support, my music, and do that for any artist that you like. And I say this every time, and I can't stress it enough. If you like an artist's music, please support them by purchasing their music. So that's going to do it for this one. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.